Hi everybody and welcome back to Cloud Lunch and Learn. We're here today for the third session in our So You Want to Be an Azure Solutions Architect Expert. With that said, I will hand over to your speaker, Dwayne.
Thank you very much, Lisa, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. It seems like we have everybody in all of those areas here today. Welcome to the Platform as a Service session of So You Want to Be a Azure Solution Architect Expert. For those of you that are new to these sessions, my name is Dwayne Natwick. I'm an author, trainer, product manager with multiple years experience in IT. I have multiple certifications in the industry, including my Solution Architect Expert, and my day job is a cloud training architect for Ops Agility, developing training content and delivering Microsoft authorized content as a certified trainer, as well as a regional lead for the Microsoft Certified Trainer Program. So we've talked in the previous two sessions, we've talked the first session around all of the objectives and around the exams. For those of you that aren't familiar with the exams, I'm going to just kind of do a recap real quick. The AZ 300 and 301 were the exams. They're the current exams for becoming a solution architect expert. But the AZ 303 and 304 exams are replacing those exams here in about 60 days. The betas are out for both of these exams, so there's really two exams running right now. Key thing around, if you're going to take the beta, you aren't going to get your results right away. You'll get them after they are released to GA. So if before September 30th, if you want to know whether you passed or failed for either one of these exams, take the 300 or 301. It doesn't matter which of the current, the current or the beta you take. It's still the same certification, and that certification is still good for 2 years. If you take the 300 and the 301, when they expire in September, you're not going to lose your certification. So I want to make that clear. Links here for the objective areas. You can get to those very quickly and easily going to Microsoft Learn. And so, we have, and I want to touch on this importantly for this particular session. I mentioned in the intro session that the first exam is very closely tied to the objectives of the Azure Administrator exam, which is the AZ 104 exam, previously the 103 exam. Today's content and information, especially around when we're talking about databases, is probably the biggest area of the delta between 104 and 300, 303. So if you've gotten your Azure Admin Associate certification and you're looking at taking the 300 and the 303, the database section is really the biggest and most important section to really get yourself comfortable with. There's probably also a bit more detail on app services. The platform services are not touched on a whole lot in 104. So if you're strong in that area and those objectives of 104, this session should be very helpful in kind of bridging that delta between those two exams. And like I said, if you take the 104 exam and pass that exam, you are ready. You could jump right into the 300, 303 exam in a couple weeks, be ready to take that exam. So just something to know there and something to understand as we're going through the content today, that this session is probably really good, especially if you're a associate certified administrator right now on Azure. And again, the 301, 304 exam is very strong on architecture. Again, a good database focus, business continuity, and those things are really key objective areas in this particular exam. So let's jump into the topics that we're going to talk about today. I mentioned databases, which we're going to hit on that. The container services start becoming a little bit more prevalent when we're talking about the PaaS and the architect certification. App services, as I said, and then a lot of the other serverless and microservices like logic apps and functions and event grid, event hubs begin to be much more in the forefront with this exam, and we'll talk about these key areas here as we go through. I put out a blog article yesterday on social media and on my captainhyperscaler.com site that had links to all of the Microsoft docs for all of this. So if you're looking for more detail and more information on this, I've also have it on the slides, but and we'll provide the slides to everybody on the Cloud Lunch and Learn GitHub after this is over also, so you'll have access to additional information. Remember, these sessions, since they're only an hour, are only overview of these objectives. Don't have time to go into deep detail on these topics completely, but hopefully give you enough information to get you comfortable and get you moving forward into all of the deep objectives. All right, so Azure App Services is the first topic that we're going to hit on today, and it is important around app services as you're preparing for the solution architect exams to understand. And when we talked last or Monday about the infrastructure as a service pieces, we talked about the scaling out and scaling in of virtual machines. And when we're talking about app services and we're talking about the capabilities around app services, we start talking about the scaling up and scaling down a lot more, because each of the subscription levels for your app services and what you want to do for your applications or your web app in Azure really depend on what subscription you pick. And as you're developing and as your app evolves, you may want to scale up those subscriptions to provide more of a more customization, more scaling, more the ability for more users and ability for more global distribution of your app service. So what I've got in this slide on the left here is what those pricing options are. And when you're developing and when you're creating those apps and when you're testing those apps, it's always good. Obviously, a free is better, right? But it's not really production grade. But you can really jump into app services very quickly and easily to find if it's what you're looking to utilize, if it works for what code you're writing, and presents for your customers very easily using this free tier. The next up is the shared tier. So and one of the things that comes with once you hit the share tier, as you can see down here at the bottom, is here's where you can start putting in custom domains. So if you want to create a web app, say you're going to host your blog on Microsoft Azure, and you want to have your custom domain as part of that, rather than having a name dot AzureAppServices.com as your name, then you need to start with the shared tier. Shared tier is still pretty cost economic in the cost area, so you can move into those pieces from a standpoint of getting your app developed, getting that custom domain in there. You can note here that both the free and the shared are just a single instance. So there's no scaling with that. There's no you don't have the ability to spread your app on a global scale, you're going to pick a region and it's going to be in that region. Once you start getting up to the basic tier, you're getting into more production type environments, and you're getting into the area where you can have multiple instances. So you can have, a instance in, for a basic tier, you can see you have up to 3. So you could put an instance in three different countries if you wanted to have a custom domain and move from there. Key thing, with the basic tier is that you still are static in terms of how your app is going to run. You don't have the ability to dynamically scale resources and be able to handle increased demand. You would have to scale up to the standard tier, which you can see once you get to the standard tier, you start to get all of the features and functions that you might want in terms of a web app from a production standpoint to handle increased and decreased demand and things like that, especially if you're running kind of an e-commerce site as part of your web app. You have that scaling opportunity from your within your app. Excuse me. And you can see the difference here between each of the tiers as you scale up between especially standard and premium has the ability to move into more and more machines. So as your demand increases, you might have to scale up because you might go beyond that 10 instance need. And if you have a high security requirement in your website and need kind of a dedicated compute resources in the background, that's where the isolated comes in. So that's the big key differentiator from an isolated instance standpoint that you don't get with any of the others. All of the others are that on-demand type resources within the serverless environment. Do we have any questions, Lisa? I'll pause there real quick.
Yes, we've just had one come in. Does the number refer to the number of instances of the app in the app service plan, or the number of different levels available for that plan?
So the number of instances is for you can deploy multiple instances, and it would be you could run different apps on those instances within the app service. So it's not necessarily one app across those instances necessarily. It's how many instances you have. So you could run multiple apps on those instances if you would like. I think that's what you're asking in that question. But you also have the option for a single app to scale across multiple apps as well. So if you're, like I said, I'm using the example of a web app, particularly as a single app type instance, you can run those across. But app services have multiple uses when you subscribe to an app service across multiple services within the Azure environment. And in a few moments, when we talk about Azure Functions can actually leverage an app service subscription as well.
Okay, cool. I'm just double checking to see if that answers the question, but I think it does.
All right. And just to finish up the slide on app services is, you can do Windows or select Windows or Linux instances when you create your app service, and select what those instances are running in the background, depending on what you're comfortable with and what your application is running. And you have multiple languages supported. So the key things on this slide are key points to kind of focus on and understand when you're going into studying for the exam, because these are areas that you may see questions on. So things to understand there. You can see here the last bullet here when we talk about containers. A big piece of what is talked about containers within this exam that has started to enter is that running web apps and running web apps in containers is a key objective as well. So that falls into the container side as well as the app services side of the exam. Logic apps, we'll talk about this and show this a little bit in the demo, but we start talking about some of the microservices, and I'm going to hit on two of them in this presentation, but there are, and I'm going to then just kind of glaze over a few other ones because we could probably spend an hour and a half talking through all of them, because they really start coming into this platform services and those objectives within this exam set. So it's important to understand the key differences between each of them. Logic apps, if nobody's worked with logic apps, and if anybody's worked with the if this then that app, it's very similar to that. It's a graphical cloud-based interface to orchestrate tasks, where it says if this condition happens, then it's going to do this, it's going to execute this action. And so you can create very easily some workflows and within the Azure environment for both executing Azure playbooks, Azure workbooks, Azure, feeding Azure resources, restarting a virtual machine, executing a runbook to restart a virtual machine, things like that, right within the Logic App Designer, and it can integrate with services that aren't inside the Microsoft ecosystem. You can initiate an Outlook email. You can do things with Microsoft 365, but you can also do things from triggering, triggering a tweet, getting a tweet to a certain hashtag, executing some sort of bot or some sort of execution within that Logic App Designer, and we'll show some of that here in the demo section. So, but key thing here is knowing that this is a graphical workflow to orchestrate tasks, and if you need to visualize it and you're familiar with like the if this then that app on the within an Android phone or Apple phone, the iPhone, you can go through and you can kind of understand how that works is very similar to how Logic App works. Azure Functions is a little bit different, where this is doing the same thing that a Logic App does from a standpoint of it is looking for some sort of a trigger. Those triggers generally come from a multiple different Microsoft Azure services, as you can see down at the bottom here, like a something that goes into Cosmos DB, or a file being added, a file or queue being added to your storage account, or something being fed from an IoT device into an event grid or event hub, a message into a service queue or service bus topic, and then also even something that's time-based or based on somebody hitting your website from a HTTP standpoint. But these are little pieces of code that then execute a task. So it's not as graphical. You write that little piece of code in C# or Java, JavaScript, Python, or PowerShell. Those are the key pieces there. This is another service that you could run very simply on consumption as a free service. Or like I said, when we were talking about app services, you could tie your app service plan into the Azure Functions as well. So, so if you have one of the production type plans, something above the free tier, you can use that app service plan to cover the costs and use the cost of the Azure Functions. So here we start getting into container services, as we talked about when we were talking about the intro. We start seeing container services, not a whole lot of container services in many of the other exams. I think as all of the Microsoft exams around Azure start evolving, you're going to see container services more and more become a key component to them, but they're still just kind of leaking their way in. But I've put here, Microsoft does have in Azure 2 different services. And, Azure container instances is kind of your stepping stone into container services within the Azure ecosystem. But you do see a lot more around Kubernetes becoming the de facto standard and what everybody's using, because it's not just in Azure, it's in AWS, it's in Google. So everybody is that's getting into container services generally is gravitating to Kubernetes. But a key thing around, if you're just getting started in container services and want to learn about and test applications within a container, you could move into just using an Azure container instance. And you can see here the use cases between the two. Really, the Azure container instance is really for simple applications. It has the creation of a container image. It gives you an isolated container, so that's nice if you're doing some development or you have a simple application that needs to have its own isolated container rather than sharing containers across multiple applications within Kubernetes. But it really is that simple application isolated service. If you really are leveraging and utilizing the full benefit of containers, really Kubernetes is the place to go. It provides that full orchestration. It provides coordinated upgrades and within for your applications. It provides those services across multiple containers with auto scaling. So if you have a production application that has the need to scale and has that need for excuse me, has that requirement to be able to serve a 24/7 use and application, Kubernetes is really the direction to go. But it's important to know when talking about and discussing these and understanding these when going into the exam, to understand how they differentiate themselves. And these are the key differentiators between the two. So next we're going to talk about the database services, and we'll spend a little bit of time on both of the key platform services in here. And when we talk about SQL within Azure, we have really three different options of SQL within the Azure environment, and we'll show that in the demo as well. And you can see down the last bullet, I probably should have put this in the first bullet for something to discuss, but Azure SQL Database is the fully managed platform, the PaaS offering of SQL. You do not have any responsibility for management and patching at the OS level down. So all you're doing is you're running your database instance, and your databases are what you're focusing on. You do not have to focus or put any time into any upgrades or updates, patching, backups, monitoring, scaling of your database. It's all done within this service. So that's the great thing. If you don't need if you just need to be able to create databases, create elastic pools, and have your database ready, available, and working, this is the service for you. If you need to do any kind of tweaking or enhancement to the SQL backend and the SQL application itself, then you need to probably stand up a virtual machine that has SQL loaded on it if you really have to do a lot of customization, or even a managed SQL instance will give you a little bit more control over the SQL operating system. But the managed SQL instance is kind of the in-between hybrid between standing up a virtual machine with SQL, which is really an IaaS type service, and the managed, and the PaaS service. The managed SQL instance is a little bit different. There's patching and updates that are done on the SQL application that that you don't have to worry about. But this one is your fully managed. So if you just want to work on databases, this is the one to go with, the Azure SQL database. Again, you get 4 nines in availability, so very high availability. And there's 2 different options in terms of pricing. Whether you need it from a compute standpoint and you want to make sure that you have the processing power behind your service, that's where you would use the vCore model. The DTU is the database unit, which has to do with your data, your amount of use, your level of usage of that database, and what you're using in terms of a storage level, which is, there's a calculation that goes into that I'm not going to get deep into, but you can find out more about how the DTU is calculated and utilized, and both of those are priced going to Microsoft Docs. But I understand there's 2 different features and functions. So if you see a question where it's mentioning you need to have a guaranteed level of compute power to your database, that's where you would use your vCore. That's your key differentiator and understanding point there in the 2. Great service. It's probably the more expensive of the 3 options. So when you're considering from a pricing standpoint, budgeting standpoint, understand that's the case. But you're going to, from a manpower standpoint, have a lot less administrative needs for patching your database or concerns about that. I know from talking to administrators that have worked on databases, when a patch or an update comes to SQL, it generally creates some sort of issue in terms of patching that database, and creates an issue to those databases. And there's a lot of manpower that goes into testing those patches before you release them. Microsoft is doing all that in the back end. And since a organization doesn't have access to the database application to do any kinds of tweaks or changes to enhance or change those connection settings, an update's going to go a lot more smoothly as well. Pause for a second there. Do we have a question?
Yeah, we've just had a question come in. What limitation is there on number of databases in the Azure SQL database instance and the managed SQL instance?
There aren't really limitations between those 2. You have the ability to scale up and scale down and scale out your resources and make adjustments to them from both standpoints. The real difference is between the managed SQL instance and Azure SQL database is really in the availability. The availability levels, the SLAs are much higher if you're using the fully managed PaaS service rather than the managed SQL instance. So that's really your key thing. Even the managed SQL instance, like I said, they do cover those upgrades, updates, and patching, but your backups and monitoring are going to be a little bit more your responsibility to stand up those services. You're going to have to create your recovery services vault and your Azure monitoring for the managed SQL instance and for the SQL virtual machine to have those backups in place when those are all part of the PaaS service. So these last 2 bullets here are probably the key differentiator between a managed SQL instance and an Azure SQL database. But you have flexibility in both of those services to scale your subscription and increase your processing power or your database size requirements. All right. All right. So Cosmos DB is another key database feature. So Microsoft has talked and has a lot of different database services available within its environment. You can launch a MySQL database. You can launch multiple different databases, but they've gravitated now in their exam content to really talk about SQL or talk about Cosmos DB. And Cosmos DB, a key point around that is it handles has APIs for NoSQL databases, as well as it can help an API and connect with a SQL database. So you can see in the second bullet here a lot of different ways and API ways to connect Cosmos DB into other database services. And this is key to understand when you're learning and preparing for the exam, is the different APIs and what they are, because you might get a question that says what API, which of these is not an API for Cosmos DB or something like that. So it's very important to understand these 5 different APIs. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on it today. The key differentiator of Cosmos DB versus any of the other SQL or NoSQL database services within the Azure environment is Cosmos DB is that globally distributed database service. So if you have a case study or a question where it is asking you to determine what database service to use, and the organization is a global organization and needs global distributed services with high availability, Cosmos DB should be what comes top of mind right away. So that's very important there. You can see here, it is a very scalable for throughput and storage across worldwide regions in Azure, and has a very extremely high availability of 5 nines. So it's going to potentially not see any downtime, or if you see any downtime, it's going to be a blip on the screen from your standpoint. So it's important here to understand from that standpoint. You have your throughput and your storage. There are multiple consistency levels that you need to understand, and I've got the link here that really goes through those consistency levels, and Microsoft does a very good job in Azure to help you understand how those go through by using musical beats, and understand that what they do from a latency and consistency level are different in terms of how they align with where you write and where you read that information. And the 5 consistency levels are listed right here, and they are in order of your highest consistency level, your most consistent from strong, and then to eventual. So you need to understand these and why and how, what the pros and cons are, and why and where you would select them as part of preparing for the exam. Understand that which consistency level you choose, there's going to be a cost associated with that as well. So the strong consistency level is obviously going to carry the largest cost from a distribution standpoint, because what they're making sure that you have is, as soon as you've done a write on a database anywhere in the world, that is available in a read anywhere in the world. So it is a real-time update for the most part. Boundless, stateless has a little bit of lag to it, but it might be lag that you're okay with. And then as you get to eventual, it's exactly that. Things might come in a different order. They might, and they're going to all align eventually. So it's going to depend on how dynamic your data is, how often your information is being updated. If you're utilizing a service where everything needs to be updated immediately, then you're going to look at one of these first two probably, or very, something that is immediate or something that goes in a short amount of time. You could get away probably with boundless staleness. But if you're getting to a point where your data doesn't need to necessarily align, but it needs to all get into that database in one way or another eventually, that's where eventual comes in. Consistent prefix is probably, from a standpoint of a not hugely dynamic and busy database goes, but from a consistent prefix standpoint, it still gets loaded to that database in order. So if you need to do things in order, and so that database, there's no corruption that happens in that database, that's where consistent prefix really comes in, and session come in. There is some lag in how often it's updated, but you start getting, but everything maintains consistency in terms of the order that they get loaded in the database. Eventual, everything kind of just goes however they go. We have a question, Lisa?
No. Hugo is just having a chat about the SQL managed instances still, so we're all good.
All right. I'm going to hit on this slide. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on, and I'm going to get into the demo because I know we're getting to the last 20 minutes here. The other PaaS services and microservices that you need to understand just at probably a high level, not a real deep level, because there's other exams and things that we get into. We have the AI 100 exam for cognitive services. IoT hubs hit really hard, obviously, in the IoT developer exam. The event grid and event hub are really a big part of the data exams, but it's important to understand some of the differences in them. Understand Service Bus is a messaging service. It takes messages and then puts that, you can utilize, a function based on the service bus. You can feed the event grid with information from service bus and things like that. It's important to know, from all of these services on the screen, essentially can feed event grid and then execute a function or a logic app and things like that. Event hub and IoT hub are places where data is coordinated, is fed into from edge devices. So those things are important to know and important to understand where each of those come in. Obviously, IoT hub is fairly self-explanatory. It's IoT devices. Event hub can come from multiple different sources, including IoT devices. So those are some things to understand in terms of differentiating these services on the screen. Cognitive services are those intelligence services and those machine learning services within the Azure environment. So let's go into and talk about a few things here that I've deployed. Hopefully you're seeing my Azure Portal now. Can you confirm that with me, Lisa?
Yep.
All right, great. So what we have here, and I'll show a few things within here. I'll start really with the SQL piece, and I've already started a deployment here where you can see within Azure SQL, when you go to create Azure SQL, you can see here it actually gives you right off the bat those three services we talked about. And this is somewhat new from a standpoint of the deployment of Azure SQL. You used to have to really pick which service right away. Now it kind of gives you the three services. Here's your IaaS service where you can actually pick which SQL license you're going to put on a virtual machine right here in your image. Here's your managed SQL instance. You can see that you've got a single instance type here. So you're really just doing a single instance. So here's another differentiator here. If you want to use an elastic pool or like we said, the high availability, backups, resiliency, and everything like that, that's where your PaaS service comes in. And you can, if you go into the Azure database and do show details, it's going to pop up the Azure Docs, the Microsoft Docs. It's going to give you, that's going to give you all the information. But here, you know, in terms of your resource type, you can create your single database, elastic pool, database server, and it can take you all through these the service and create your high availability service from there. So I'm not going to go deep into it, but you can pick, you know, you can create a new server if you don't have a server, and get that all done within within the Azure portal. I'm not going to stand up a SQL database now, but I just wanted to point out those different options when you create. And that SQL database, it kind of goes in that order of PaaS service to IaaS service when you do that. Cosmos DB, I stood up a Cosmos DB instance here just to kind of show everybody real quick here. You can see here we can create our container and everything within here. I wanted to, let's see, where's my here's your consistency levels. So here, like I was saying, it defaults to session level, and you can see here, based on the areas here, it pairs up your regions, and it's showing here what your consistency is, and can show you by beats what a session consistency is going to look like. And you can see with paired regions and using session, it is still very spot on consistency. Going globally to Australia on the other side of the globe, there is a bit of a delay, but you can see that from a session consistency, that delay is still all in order. If I go up here and choose eventual, this is where you're going to see things really jump around down in Australia. You can see here it's jumping around. Here you're getting blue, you're getting black. It's like really inconsistent in how it's going into play in terms of reads and writes. With this one, because I do, because of what how I stood up the database, you're not going to see strong, but strong's very easy to understand. It's going to show everything across the board being right on from every region. It's going to be dead set on. You can see boundless stateless is still very consistent, and even from Australia, there isn't a whole lot of lag in terms of the latency of your writes to be read in Australia. So really a nice graphical way to understand how to choose and how to utilize the different consistency levels. All right. Next thing I wanted to show was logic apps, and we talked about logic apps quite a bit. And you can see here, there are a lot of common triggers and templates that are already in place within the environment and within the designer right off the bat. And here you can see some services that aren't Azure specific services that are outside. Here's one with utilizing MailChimp. When a new member is added, we need to add them to SharePoint. We're putting them into our database. So somebody signs up to your MailChimp list, your MailChimp mailing list, it goes into your SharePoint, it goes into your Dynamics, however, it goes into your CRM, you can utilize that. Here's some things right to Power BI. Here's some SAP workflows, and you can see all those within here. Send me an email when somebody adds something to SharePoint Online. So this is utilizing services all outside of Azure, but they are within the 365 ecosystem. Here's something that has nothing to do with Microsoft at all. If creating a workflow that when your tweets, when somebody in your organization sends a tweet out, it's shared on Facebook as well. So a lot of different things that can be done within here, and it's very easy to get started just using one of these these templates here. So I can right here, here's daily reminders email to you. So we use this template here. It's going to launch that designer, and you can see here, you can here we would want to. It's going to make me authenticate with my organization. Here I can add a user for 365. Again, I'll just use what I'm signed in as and continue. And then here it brings up your graphical designer where okay, how often am I going to do this? What is my parameter? Based on start time, time zone. Here I've already done my profile here. Okay, what's this email going to say? What's the subject of that email? Here it's got daily reminders as a standard here. Here we can make different things. We can put different fields in here depending on what we want to see and what we want in that subject. And here we can customize that reminder as well. Hi, it's grabbing the display name from the profile we created from my Office 365 account. Here's your daily reminder. If you want to say here, you can actually say, don't forget about these tasks. You can customize this however you want. Save your changes, and you've created your logic app. If you have other steps you want to put in here, you can very easily create a new step, find a new action. If I want to take something that, take an email and tweet about that email, I could do that here. Very, very different, very new things, very dynamic things that you can do in terms of creating creating a workflow without having the need to understand code. You can just do this based on, okay, this is how I visualize what I want to do here. And you have some options here. It's going to tell you, you have the option here to test and run what you want to do here as well. So you can run it right from here to make sure that it works properly. So very easy to test it right from this interface as well, right from this designer. Let's see. Last thing I wanted to just kind of show real quick before we finish up here is I wanted to show I created a function app here, and you can see here your Azure Functions. So here, you have a little bit more here where you're going to need to develop your functions a little bit more. So you need to do, unlike logic apps where you can very quickly and easily get a workflow and some automation built within that graphical interface of the designer. Here you actually do have to do some code, and here you can create some of these. You can see what we've talked about in terms of many of the different triggers and things. Like I said, timer trigger. This does set you through creating the schedule and creating the function. But you need to understand and need to put your code in here. If you don't understand how to create functions, GitHub's a good resource to go and find some pre-made functions. There's a lot of pre-made functions out in GitHub. So if you went into even just Microsoft's GitHub page and look up Azure Functions, you can find some function templates in there. Not a whole lot you need to know about running code and creating code for functions within these exams, but it is something to understand the differentiators between each of these services that can these microservices that can initiate workflows. So and where and how you can initiate those, and what the use cases would be are very key to architecting an Azure environment. So that ends the presentation. I wanted to hopefully give everybody a good background of the platform services again, get everybody excited to go out again, take the self-assessment that I've talked about in the previous two sessions. That's very helpful to understand where you lie in terms of the objectives for these exams, Microsoft Docs and Microsoft Learn. go to my blog article that accompanies that I'm writing to accompany these series. The PaaS one went up yesterday. I've got some helpful links in there for resources and external, other community leaders that provide a lot of information, a lot of links to helpful information to help you prepare. So that this hopefully was helpful to you, and we'll go from there into next Friday. We're going to now hit every Friday till the end of the month, and we're going to get into security and identity next week, which is a key to any Microsoft exam and one that I enjoy talking about. So we'll have have some good information hopefully next week when we talk about security and identity, which is a foundational need that you need for any exam within the Azure environment.
Cool, thank you so much, Dwayne. I have popped some links in the chat, people. So first of all, we'd love if you could provide us some feedback on the session. So there's a link for that. We've got a link for signing up for the 4th session, Security and Identity, on Friday the 17th, just as Dwayne said. And also there is a session quiz, right, Dwayne? So do you want to let me know a little bit about that?
So if you go out and take the quiz, and I'm not sure if Fergal Quigley is on today, but I want to congratulate him. He was the winner of the IAS quiz. So I'll be contacting you. What you'll win is a 2-month subscription to Skill Me Up, which is the company I work for, Opsagility's on-demand training portal. So you'll get 2 months of free access to all of the on-demand course content, which includes the AZ 300 and AZ 301 exam content. So you can go out and prepare for the exam using this subscription. And I'll give another one of those away each week to the lucky winner. What I'm doing is, if you get 100%, anybody that gets 100% on the exam, keep in mind that it might say that you got one wrong, but that's going to be your name and email that's going to be that wrong answer. So I am curving it up. So if you only get one wrong, and that's the one that you get wrong, I put everybody into a random name choice generator, and it'll come up with a winner, and I'll contact you and announce you on the next session as well.
Awesome, well done, Fergus. Okay, so thanks everybody for your time today. We really appreciate you taking your lunch out to spend with us, or maybe it's your breakfast, or maybe it's your afternoon with us, but we do really appreciate it. Please do, I know there's a lot of links in the chat, but please do take the time to provide us feedback, complete the Microsoft form, and definitely get signed up for the next session, and we'll see you back here next Friday.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, bye-bye.